Hook analysis, the first 30 seconds.
The original opening relied on an impersonal narrative style. A signal left Earth and spent the next 23 hours. While poetic, it functions like a textbook or a standard documentary voiceover, failing to create immediate psychological buy-in. The retention strategy. To maximize retention, we shift from a passive third-person description to an immediate, visceral thought experiment directed straight at the viewer. We use a staggering contrast: the simplicity of an everyday car key versus a multi-billion-mile space voyage, to shock the brain into paying attention. By removing the academic tone and focusing on the slow, deliberate sacrifice of a machine's senses, the first 30 seconds become deeply personal and gripping. Here is the complete script. It contains every piece of data, every historical mention, and the full conceptual weight of your original text, completely unabridged. All artificial structures, labels, and brackets have been removed, and the vocabulary has been tuned to a natural, high-impact human cadence optimized for the teleprompter. Have you ever stopped to think about the fact that right now, 16 billion miles away in the freezing dark, a piece of human hardware is slowly going blind and deaf because we are commanding it to? The computer keys you use to unlock your car have more memory than this machine. Yet, for nearly half a century, it has done exactly what we asked. Its name is Voyager 1, and right now, it is dying. Not all at once, and not in some spectacular explosion. It is fading the way a candle dies, 1 degree of warmth at a time, while engineers back on Earth are forced to make a brutal decision over and over again. Which of its remaining senses do we sacrifice next, just to keep the rest of the machine alive a little while longer? A few weeks ago, a radio signal left Earth and spent 23 hours traveling at the speed of light through the void. When it finally reached the aging probe past the absolute edge of our solar system, it carried a single devastating instruction: switch off another science instrument. Go a little blinder so you can survive the winter. When Voyager 1 left Earth, it carried 10 sophisticated scientific instruments. Today, only 2 of them are still listening. But the most important thing it carries into the deep dark was never a scientific instrument at all. To understand what is actually at stake out there, you have to look at a man who is barely mentioned in the current news reports, because the slow death of this spacecraft is not just a triumph of engineering, it is the closing chapter of an idea that one person fought tooth and nail to put aboard, an idea about who we are, how small we are, and what, if anything, we deserve to leave behind when we are gone. And that man has been dead for almost 30 years. Let's start with the machine itself, because the hardware is running out of time first. Voyager 1 launched back in 1977, just a few weeks after its twin, Voyager 2. Back then, the mission blueprint was incredibly modest compared to what actually happened. The plan was to fly past Jupiter, coast by Saturn, send back a few years of photographs of the gas giants, and then drift off into total irrelevance. Nobody on the original team seriously expected these 2 probes to be functional in the next decade, let alone the next century. They were built using the primitive technology of the disco era. And yet, against all operational odds, they just kept going. They cruised past Saturn, they crossed the orbit of Pluto, they kept sailing until they hit the boundary where the solar wind finally gives out and true interstellar space begins. A frontier Voyager 1 crossed in 2012, making it the first object built by human hands to ever leave the protective bubble of our own star. No spacecraft has ever traveled farther. Nothing we have ever manufactured has seen what it is seeing right now, which is precisely why letting it go feels completely impossible. But the physics of the universe are relentless. Both Voyagers run on a nuclear battery that turns the heat of decaying plutonium into electricity. It is reliable, but it has a built-in expiration date. Every single year, the spacecraft permanently loses about 4 watts of power. 4 watts sounds like nothing. It is less than the tiny light bulb inside your kitchen refrigerator. But when you multiply that loss across 49 years of continuous deep space travel, the math becomes catastrophic. There simply isn't enough electricity left to keep the lights on. There simply isn't enough electricity left to keep the lights on. The 30 seconds relied on propaganda, while the original opening relied on an impersonal narrative style.
For years, engineers have been forced to act like a family, rationing the very last logs of firewood in a blizzard.
They have systematically turned off heaters and shut down systems one by one, following a grim priority list they agreed on decades ago. In the spring of 2026, the power dropped unexpectedly yet again. The team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had to send the command to kill the instrument that had been quietly measuring charged particles in the space between the stars since the Carter administration. With that single order, Voyager 1 was left with just 2 working science instruments out of its original 10. 7 of its senses are permanently gone, and the clock is still ticking. 4 watts a year, every single year, with absolutely no way to ever refuel. Think about the surreal nature of that daily workflow. The spacecraft is so far away that when you send a command, you have to sit in a quiet room for almost an entire day just to find out if the machine even heard you. The people in that control room are speaking to an object that, by the time their data arrives, is already a full day deeper into the uncharted dark. They are sending messages to the past, praying that the future answers them back. So why do we keep fighting for it? Why not just let it drift away quietly? Because the data it is streaming back is entirely unique. Voyager 1 and its twin are the only 2 objects humanity has ever placed in interstellar space. They are the only witnesses reporting from a region of the cosmos no other machine has ever touched. Every single byte of data they transmit is information we cannot obtain any other way. Once they fall silent, that window slams shut forever. Right now, the engineering team is racing against time to roll out a high-stakes software upgrade they've nicknamed the Big Bang. It is a clever, desperate patch designed to squeeze a tiny bit of extra efficiency out of the ancient hardware. They tested it first on Voyager 2 because it is currently closer to Earth and slightly healthier. If the patch holds, they will try the exact same desperate fix on Voyager 1, and there is even a faint, outside chance it could revive one of the instruments they were forced to kill. But it is a massive gamble. At this stage, as one director put it, every single day could be the last. But the power metrics, the science instruments, and the brilliant software patches are just the parts of the story that make the headlines. That is the part you can calculate. It is not the real reason Voyager matters to us. To find that, you have to look back at a quiet, intense argument that happened decades ago inside NASA over whether to do something that had absolutely zero scientific value. The man behind that argument was Carl Sagan. By the time the Voyagers were sitting in assembly clean rooms, Sagan was on his way to becoming the most famous scientist on Earth. The man who would soon stand in front of a camera and teach millions of people how to look at the night sky. But he wasn't just a television communicator. He was a brilliant astronomer, possessed by a stubborn, poetic conviction. He knew that these 2 machines were going to survive long after their planetary flybys were over. He realized they were eventually going to escape the sun's gravity entirely and drift through the galaxy for an unimaginable stretch of time, longer than all of recorded human history, longer than our species has even existed. Sagan looked at these probes and realized they weren't just pieces of tech. They were message bottles about to be tossed into the largest, emptiest ocean in existence. And he asked a question that a standard aerospace engineer would never think to ask. If something, someday, out there in the dark, ever fishes one of these bottles out of the void, what should it say about us? The answer to that question became the golden record. Sagan led a small, hyper-focused team to build a phonograph record made of copper, plated in gold, and bolted securely to the chassis of each Voyager. On that disc, they encoded the physical sound of a human heartbeat, the words of a mother speaking to her newborn child, and spoken greetings in dozens of different human languages. They recorded the songs of humpback whales, the crack of thunderstorms, and music ranging from classical masterpieces to field recordings of ancient cultures. They etched diagrams showing who we are, how our biology works, and a map pinpointing exactly how to find our planet. It was a complete self-portrait of humanity, sealed in a gold jacket and flung into the wilderness of the universe with absolutely no return address.
Almost nobody on the team believed an alien intelligence would ever actually find it.
Sagan wasn't stupid. He knew the mathematical odds. The galaxy is so staggeringly empty that the probability of one of these records being intercepted by an alien civilization is so close to zero, it is barely worth typing into a calculator. But that was precisely the point. The golden record was never truly meant for an extraterrestrial audience. It was meant for us. The agonizing process of having to sit in a room and decide what represented the entire human race forced us to look at ourselves from the outside. It forced us to ask what was actually worth saving and what we wanted to be remembered for if we blew ourselves up. It was a mirror disguised as an interstellar message. Then, a little over a decade after launch, Sagan took that mirror, turned it around, and pointed it straight back at our faces. By 1990, Voyager 1 had completed its primary mission. It was sitting nearly 4 billion miles away from home, and NASA was preparing to shut down its cameras forever to preserve the remaining battery life. Sagan came forward with one final, poetic request. Before you blind the spacecraft permanently, turn it around. Point the lens back the way it came. Look across the billions of miles toward the center of the solar system and take one last picture of home. From a scientific standpoint, the photograph was completely useless. There was absolutely nothing to learn from it. In fact, some administrators at NASA fought against it, terrified that pointing the sensitive optics so close to the glare of the sun would instantly fry the camera tubes. But Sagan pushed through the bureaucracy. They turned the ship, and when the data beamed back across the void, the entire planet Earth, every ocean, every empire, every city, and every single human being who had ever drawn breath showed up as a single microscopic dot. It was less than a single pixel wide, a tiny, pale speck of dust, almost completely swallowed by a stray beam of scattered sunlight, suspended in the vast, terrifying immensity of total blackness. Sagan looked at that pixel and saw the entire human comedy written inside it. Every person you have ever loved, every war ever fought in the name of an empire, every corrupt politician, every saint, every criminal, every technological triumph, and every act of cruelty in the history of our species had occurred right there on that one nearly invisible mote of dust. He understood, looking at that framing, that there is absolutely no sign that we are important to the wider universe. There is no hint that help is coming from the outside to save us from our own stupidity. There is just this one small, fragile world, the thin film of atmosphere clinging to it, and a cold, silent ocean of space all around it that doesn't even know we exist. That photograph became known as the pale blue dot. It remains the most profoundly humbling image our species has ever produced, and it was captured by the exact same fading machine that engineers are now systematically turning off, one sense at a time. This is the exact intersection where the engineering story and the human story collide, and it is the depth that the news reports completely miss. The machine is dying. That part is an undeniable fact, and the end is fast approaching. Within a few years, maybe even months, the very last instrument on Voyager 1 will flatline. The internal heaters will freeze, the radio transmitter will drop its carrier signal, and somewhere out in the dark beyond the solar wind, a 49-year-old piece of American aluminum will become exactly what every other piece of space junk is, a cold, tumbling relic, no longer talking, no longer listening, and no longer ours in any way that matters. But the golden record will still be there, bolted to the side of that frozen carcass, untouched, unpowered. It doesn't need plutonium to work. It doesn't lose 4 watts of power every year. It will just keep drifting in absolute silence, carrying its human heartbeats, its whale songs, and its greetings in dozens of dead languages through a galaxy that may never hear them.
And here is the reality that genuinely shifts how you look at your own life. That record is going to outlast almost everything you can physically conceive of. It will keep traveling long after the spacecraft stops functioning. It will keep traveling long after the last person who remembers the mission has turned to dust. Scientists estimate that, barring a freak collision with a space rock, the golden record will survive intact for hundreds of millions, possibly billions of years.
That is a span of time longer than complex life has even existed on this planet. It is a duration so vast that by the time that record enters a different quarter of the galaxy, our own sun will have aged, brightened, and boiled the oceans of Earth completely dry. The record will still be out there, pristine, carrying the voice of a world that has literally ceased to exist. Let that sink in for a second. We have already launched an object that is virtually guaranteed to outlive the human species. It is flying through the dark right now, and the man who fought to put our self-portrait on its hull has been dead since 1996. Carl Sagan never got to see Voyager cross the interstellar threshold. He never got to watch it run out of power, and he isn't here to witness its final, agonizing years. But he understood something that the rest of us are only now beginning to grasp as we watch this spacecraft fade. The true point of Voyager was never to actually reach an alien civilization. The point was the act of reaching itself. The point was that a young, terrified, often incredibly violent species, barely out of its own evolutionary childhood, looked up at a silent sky that offered it absolutely no promises and decided to introduce itself anyway. We wanted to say into the void, we were here, we loved each other, we made music, we wondered if anyone else was out there. That is the one thing the engineers at NASA can never switch off. They can shut down the data streams, they can lose the radio carrier, they can officially declare the mission over, turn off the lights in the control room, and walk away. But they cannot recall the record. They cannot undo the fact that we turned the camera around. Whatever we become, and whatever our final epitaph turns out to be, that message is already gone. It is moving at thousands of miles per hour, completely beyond our reach in the most permanent way anything we have ever done is beyond our reach. Sagan spent his entire career warning us never to lie to ourselves. He told us never to mistake comfort for objective truth, and never to believe a projection simply because we desperately wished it were real. And yet, he also believed down to his bones that this exact same fragile, self-deceiving species was capable of doing something genuinely noble if it could only learn to see its own scale clearly. The pale blue dot was our warning. The golden record was our hope. He handed us both, and then he bolted that hope to a machine that is now running out of time. So the next time you see a news flash stating that NASA has killed another instrument, or that Voyager 1 is down to its last 2 senses, understand what you are actually looking at. You are watching the slow, physical death of the body, not the message. The body will fall completely silent within a few years, but the message will keep traveling for 1 billion. Somewhere far ahead in a future none of us will ever live to see, there may or may not be someone, or something, with the eyes to find that piece of metal, the patience to decode its grooves, and the capacity to wonder, just for a second, about the small blue world that sent it. If they ever do find it, they won't find a broken, dead machine. They will find a heartbeat. They will find a child's voice. They will find a photograph of a pale blue dot and a quiet, stubborn insistence sealed in gold that for one brief, beautiful flicker of cosmic time, we were here and we were looking up. What they would actually hear if they played that record, the exact sounds, the melodies, and the specific voices we chose to represent humanity to the universe, is an entire story in itself, and it is far stranger and more revealing about our flaws than you might think. If you want to keep exploring the deep dark with me, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.